Hey, welcome back to part 2 of Krysten Callina, our conversation. Let's get into it. And before we do, hey, I said it the last time, it's important. We hear a lot that people want more positive things in their feed. We think we have a pretty positive thing. If you think it's a pretty positive thing, the way people can get it in their feed is by you liking it, sharing it, hey, leaving us a comment or a review and telling us how great or awful it is and what you want to improve. But we want the interaction and we appreciate it as well. We appreciate the journey that you've been on with us, and go on to this next episode.
One of the last things you were talking about was knowing your children. And while I would like to believe everybody does, I'm pretty sure everybody doesn't. Like, some people are busy, aloof, not that in touch with themselves or people around them. And I think that's okay.
Don't understand different personality differences in general, right?
Yeah. And I'm kind of hearing this narrative of community. The kind of one of the underlying things I'm kind of hearing is like assembling a team, whether or not it's homeschool or the kids are at school. And even you said like taking a class at MIT, like it was a mixture of things. And like, I just noted, like, I'm going to find the homeschool community here in LA because I've actually heard some really cool things about it. And one of the things that we get stuck with is like doing the same things over and over because we're tired, working too much, and it's just like, I'm just going to do this, versus somebody might be like, hey, there's this cool surfing group that you can go hit on, Saturdays with kids. Like, oh, dope, I didn't know that was there. And I think what I'm hearing is like, you can kind of, it's almost like work. You can outsource and or delegate the things that you're not great at. So like, I hear I know what executive function is and what kind of problems it can cause, but I don't necessarily know how it will present, especially in a child. And I know that I've seen it in adults and just been frustrated and not even thought that maybe they have a problem with executive function. That's why they can't like handle these steps. I'm like, I just gave you the steps. Like, just do the thing, man. Just do the daggone thing. And they're like, they just literally can't do it. But having someone who's trained as a teach your child, and then like that's where those parent-teacher interactions become so important, because it's like they're part of the team, like they're part of the crew that can help give you that intel, so then you can adjust or find a style that's going to reach your child. So I really like this narrative that I'm hearing, and finding what you're best at, finding what they need, what they're best at. And then whatever way works for your family, for your unit, like it might be homeschooling. Some people can't homeschool. They've got to both work or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, in the US, the majority of homeschoolers are two income, or like a single income. Like you have to be able to live on one spouse's income. I think there are some parents who kind of try to bridge the gap by doing, mom does something at night or part-time. And I mean, you can make that work. But it's tricky, and it kind of depends on the age of your child. So I mean, that's a huge thing. But most homeschoolers have two parents, and most of them are white, and or of means. And actually, the funny thing about homeschooling is that which this surprised me, and this is why I'm mentioning it. There was a study recently within the last couple of years that homeschoolers actually oftentimes do better than their in-school counterparts up until the point of that income levels reach a particular point. And I don't know what that is off the top of my head. But wealthy kids that could afford like a private school, then the homeschoolers can't compete with that. Because there's more opportunity, the more money that folks have up on the topper levels, on the upper levels of income that families have.
So it's not necessarily age related. Like, is that study saying like private school from a very early age will outperform homeschooling at the same age?
It's a whole different world, because folks that can afford really expensive private schools that kind of really speak to certain interests, there's a competition level that I can't even imagine getting into with my own family.
There's another piece, because for high school, actually I went to a couple private schools growing up, but like my high school was like hyper competitive. Used to be like used to be in the kind of like a feeder school for like high end colleges and whatnot, and it's like what I noticed is the conversations that my peers were having with their parents were just like they were at dinner talking about like the surgeries the day before and going through medical books and like just so the overall collective knowledge was just in a different place than when I was in public school or so I think that plays in. And then there's also what I'm noticing here from some of the private schools in LA is you compound that and then you compound the social network and like the opportunities that then come out of that, where it's like your parents might be a surgeon, but my parents might be sports agents, but that's what you're interested in. It's like, oh, well, come hang out with us. And then you can see what they do, or you can go to work with them. Whereas you're not going to necessarily get that opportunity at a public school or at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And it's just a whole different social network.
Whole different, good and bad.
And public schools, a lot of the times, public schools, you're also dealing with kids that are coming from all different kinds of backgrounds. So, some public school teachers are more worried about, does this kid have a warm jacket to wear? Has he had breakfast? Does he have shoes that fit his feet? Because if you're not comfortable and there's nothing in your belly, then you have a really hard time learning. And so public schools have to kind of accommodate for all these different things, kids with special needs that maybe, are more challenging, and integrating them into a school setting. There's so many more things that public schools have to worry about. So, in some cases, like I said, homeschooling is a better option. Or if that's just how your family vibes, like you might just have that, kind of relaxed, atmosphere in your family.
I mean, it gets into, the argument of quality of life. What does that actually mean? Is quality of life the most money I can make? Or is it, being able to explore and do things that matter to me that may not make me as money, but in one area, I might be able to explore the things that matter to me because I'm not in a competitive environment where I have to follow this path in order to succeed the way that I'm told to succeed. And, and I love the idea of the community as well, because that is a way to overcome those, Bobby or Brenda over here have a doctor as a mom and my kid wants to learn more about medicine. I'd like to expose them to that. And I think that's pretty good.
Well, just one more thing on this. One of my mentors does this brilliantly. Oh my God, I can't talk. His daughters are in public school and he owns a company. So he couldn't homeschool them if he wanted to. However, he does this really cool thing where he's just got like friends. He's got friends that are artists in lofts in Compton. He's got friends that own tech companies like him. He's got friends that are pilots. And so when he goes to visit them, he takes his girls but he has a conversation with them prior and after, like, all right, we're going to go visit Johnny. Johnny's an artist. He's chosen to be an artist. Notice how he lives. Like, notice he's got a loft with 5 people and this is the kind of space, this is the kind of life that he lives. And feel his vibe, like feel his energy. Like, is he happy? Is he not happy? Is he stressed? Is he struggling? Compare it to how we live and what you see me do and figure out what's going to work for you in your life versus him being like, you need to be a doctor so you can make the most.
Yeah. And those parents, whether they're homeschooling parents or, private school parents or public school parents, anybody who has that kind of attitude toward, what's around them and the community and kind of what's going on with their kids can only benefit from that. I think what we did a lot was we did a lot of travel. In fact, we just, my youngest is 19 now. And he wants to be a novelist. He wants to write, which is ironic because when he started homeschooling, he couldn't read. But now he wants to be a writer and this is what he wants to do. So he's been stuck in the house for the last 2 years, pretty much, he's been going to college, but obviously that's all online. And we live in a really small town, very kind of insular, tiny little town in Massachusetts. So we just bought a place in Branson, Missouri, where my sister is, and I needed to go out and get some things done out there. So I took him with me, and we did kind of an epic road trip across the United States to the Midwest. And by the like, he was really nervous, like the first like day or so. And then he was like, oh, like, this is just like, fine. Like, you just do your thing. And he was like, he gets very anxious about like the world being kind of a big and scary place, which I remember feeling also when I was 19. And it just kind of opened his mind and allowed him to relax and have and enjoy these different experiences. And now he's thinking about getting into photography, and he's taking a photography class. And so we did a lot of that when they were little too. And that's just what worked for our family. So we kind of tried to find experiences, and travel's a great one. Whether you do it, on your holidays, or you do it for, as a homeschooler, travel really expands kids' minds because they get to see how other people live. So I think that's so important. What your friend is doing, Rodney, is just really showing that there's not just one way. There are so many different ways to live your life, and you don't have to fit into one particular bucket to be considered a success. Like, the success is your happiness, and I think that's really important.
You get one of them. None of us beat the end.
That's right.
There's one other thing I want to touch on that was in here. Sorry, Keith, I keep saying one more thing, but
yeah, you do.
I do. That's the second time I've done it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do it one more time. You had mentioned the expectations and anxiety that your oldest son was feeling, and I think there's an important conversation here about emotional awareness and emotional intelligence and safety. Like, feeling safe will also affect your ability to learn, or lack thereof.
100%.
Like, to your point about if you're worried about food, or your parents fighting, or like,
right,
are we going to have heat tonight?
Mm-hmm.
Learning 2 + 2 is the last thing on your
hierarchy
brain.
of needs, right?
Mm-hmm. Really is. Yeah.
So that actually, I mean, this all really goes in. I actually thought you might transition with that question into the space you've created for Mastermind Adventures now that you are an entrepreneur. And was it the homeschooling and going through this experience that gave you the idea to create Mastermind Adventures? And if you could share with us what that actually is and what you do.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, it was. So as I've shared, my kids had particular needs, and they were different than other people's needs. And so, being plugged into the homeschooling community gave us a lot of flexibility in how we tried to meet those needs. And one of the main things that people always talk about when it comes to homeschooling is social interaction, which is ironic because technically, going to a public school, you're sitting at a table, you're not allowed to talk to your neighbor, you're not allowed to stand up, you're not allowed to, it's probably less social, but it's how people know that they made friends. And so they always kind of think about that as an issue. Where we are, as I've already mentioned, we had no shortage of ability to meet up with other families, other friends, and also create spaces where they could come together. So it actually started right after, not Mastermind proper, what kind of the seed of Mastermind was, when my oldest started homeschooling, and we were looking for ways for him to connect with others and stay in touch with the friends he had made at school. We started this Friday night Callina game night thing that the kids still talk about. I've got all these 20-year-olds like going, "Oh, remember when we did Callina game night?" And that's kind of how it got started. So Callina game night was a night of, kind of old school 80s style Dungeons and Dragons, and then other games as well, and video games, and sometimes movie nights, and lots of running around outside with Nerf blasters, and kind of whatever they wanted to do. So parents would, we would all kind of hang out and play games and get together, and then the kids would all just run around and do different things and play games, and that was every Friday for probably 2 years or more. We just got them together. And then out of that came this idea that we're in Massachusetts, so it's not always nice out. And how do we get them to kind of keep moving? My younger son in particular did not like any kind, well, neither of my kids really like sports. We're not really sports people. But he was starting to get chubby and we wanted a way to get him moving. So we took those Callina game night kids and we started a Friday night Nerf group. And so every Friday we would get together, kids would all bring their Nerf blasters. We kind of all chipped in for Nerf darts. And then we started organizing different types of games. And then word got out and it started to grow. And within a couple of months, we had over 100 kids coming every single Friday to play Nerf blaster games. And it was in an indoor soccer field. So we didn't have to worry about the weather. And that was really the catalyst for that part of things. And then because we started those Nerf games, we started to meet other people, other homeschoolers who just thought that this was great. This was a great way to get the kids together and socialize and get them moving, which was a real concern. And so that kind of branched into learning about live action role play and thinking about live action role play as a way to engage kids in some living literature, and also get them into, kind of these spaces that we could create for them to do some really different sorts of games and interaction. So the first thing that we put together was a Percy Jackson inspired program called Camp Half-Blood. And it was just like this huge epic field day event. We had organized it just for homeschoolers the very first year. And I was nervous that we would have like 20 kids. I was like, oh, I hope we can get, at least 20 kids to come, because then we'd have like enough kids to play the different games and they can go do the little like solve the mystery that we set up. And we had 175 kids show up for that. And so that was a huge kind of aha moment that, maybe this is something more than just a hobby. Maybe we should think about how to organize this in a way that makes sense as a business. So that was really how that started. We've organized other types of events that were like that, and they were just so popular. We'd have kids coming up after these events that we would put together. I mean, just crying that it was like, this is the best thing I ever did in my whole life. And can I come back next week? And like this kind of thing. So we were like, okay, it's good for the community. And it's good for us too, because we feel like we're making a positive impact, and giving these kids really something different. That really utilizes different sorts of different types of skills that they may not otherwise, be using.
Quick question right there on that part, like that the feedback. Have you identified what it is about the live action role play or these different games that connects with children and frankly adults like it does?
Yeah, it's a concept called bleed. So Sarah Lynn Bowman is the person who kind of identified and named what it is. She's a researcher, I believe, in Texas, or at least she was when I first met her. We've become friends over the past few years. And I can't remember where she is now. Last I saw, she was in Norway. But anyway, this concept called bleed is actually, it happens whether you have intent behind it or not. And it can be a very negative thing if it's used kind of like if you're not paying attention to
like
how something might.
Use it.
Yeah, well, any kind of immersive experience, even if you're playing a character, that what that character experiences, and you know this writing from Dungeons and Dragons, what that character experiences, even though you know in your head, like, this is not me, it bleeds into you as a human being, even if that character is not really even like you, even if that character is something that's totally different. What they experience is what you experience. And so understanding that concept is actually part of how we developed our therapeutic tabletop role-playing game. But I can talk about that more later. But that's actually what it is.
Which is kind of why I can think back, like if I get together with the people I played my first campaign with, it's like, oh, you remember that time that we were in that room and the dude jumped up on the table and then you pulled it out, and then it's like we're counting it as if we were there.
Yes.
Like in a room, like actually slaying a dragon when we were at a table rolling dice.
Yes, absolutely. The theater of the mind is really powerful. And the other thing that the other concept, and I'm not remembering if it has a name or what it's called, but because you are creating this character who's going to kind of be your avatar and move around the world, that character can take risks that you can't take. Right. You can say, yeah, we're fighting a dragon because you yourself, your body is safe. You're in a place, you're rolling dice. It's just your imagination. And specifically for kids, this is really powerful, especially for kids who have had trauma, who have lived through some really crappy stuff. They can be brave and be bold in a way that they might not be able to take that risk themselves because it's too scary, because they've been hurt too much. Or they might be able to take a chance on something that they would otherwise not take a chance, even if it's like a social interaction that, my co-worker, Evan, he's kind of like my co-pilot. He's a trauma specialist. He's a therapist and a trauma specialist. But he always brings up this one instance that we had a kid that decided to steal everybody's weapons in the party while they were asleep. And the next day, we have them wake up and Evan says, okay, so, this is what happened while you were asleep. And they just were really upset with this kid that was the player that was like, oh, he stole everything. And he's like, well, they know that you stole it. And he was like, oh, no, I was just keeping them safe and I'm going to give them all back to you now. So that was a risk that he took, and he was able to take it, and we allowed him to take that risk and then get that feedback in a very real way, the consequence, without it actually being him. And so now if he was in a real situation, he would think twice about deceiving his friends or doing something crappy to his friends. And especially for kids with executive function or autism spectrum disorder, those types of experiences are so necessary to build their skills and to generalize their skills. You do a lot of kind of isolated practice of skills with kids on the autism spectrum, or at least they did when my kids were young. They were looking for groups or ways that you could practice these skills, but it didn't help them generalize it to the real world, where this tabletop role-playing games and other types of role-play really allow them to take those risks, experiment with something that might be kind of risky, and not have to actually bear the consequence of that in their real lives.
So bleed, I did not know that was the thing, but I do have a bleed exercise that I use, especially for really emotional games, or as I've gotten more into it and I feel more from my characters. I have an exercise I use to divest from that. But it's that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
What benefits in building this to kids have you seen?
In the kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, gosh. Well, the thing that comes to mind always is kind of that first group of kids that we started playing D&D with back when my son first started homeschooling. And confidence was a huge one, just self-confidence and the ability to put themselves out there, to be silly, and to know, who they were as people. I think friendship building is a huge one. I think that, as kids go through either live action role play experiences or tabletop role play experiences, that having that camaraderie and the common goal really does bond people to each other. And especially with kids, we literally right before the pandemic, it was the February vacation before the shutdown. We were running Quest, the role-playing game, at a therapeutic center that's near my house. And one of the girls that came in, she was pretty affected. Like she was very, very, they don't use the terminology high functioning, low functioning anymore. She was very verbal, but she was very one track mind. And I was actually a little bit worried that she would be able to, manage the demands of a role playing game table. And so I kind of, I talked to her for a little bit, and she kept asking me the same questions. And I was like, okay, not sure how this is going to play out. And her grandmother asked me, because her grandmother brought her, what do you think? Is she going to be able to do this? And I was like, we're going to see. I think that, I've been surprised before, and I think we should take a chance and see. And if this group doesn't work, we'll try another group. But I think we should give it a try. And the moment she sat down at the table, she was laser focused, and she was the best role player, and she was the best at like thinking about what the other kids were doing and waiting her turn. She was on it. And what her mom said to me afterwards was like, this was the first time that she had ever been able to make friends, like actually talk about having real friends. And this girl was probably 14, 15 years old. So there's something about sitting around a table and having that shared experience that is universal, and it connects with kids at all different levels of functionality and ability and disability. If you use that term, it's just really kind of ubiquitous in how it affects people.
It's probably so the bleed thing. I think the other concept, now that you mention that, it's probably got to be the storytelling aspect. I don't know if there's anything more human than our desire to hear and tell stories. And like we connect so naturally to them that sitting around telling a story with 5 strangers or 5 friends, 5 strangers that are about to become friends is just this super cool experience.
It's this funny thing that like our mind is our biggest limiter, no matter what. Like we put more constraints on ourselves than anybody else, and going into these creative spaces gives us the opportunity to exercise that mind in a way that gives you an experience that seems so unreachable until you're in it. And then it's like, oh, that's no big deal. And like that's for all of us, let alone for those who are on the spectrum or are limited by further mental challenges or struggles. So I love what you're doing. How can people find you?
Mastermindadventures.com for sure. I'm on all of the different socials. Or Krysten at mastermindadventures.com is my email address. We're very excited about the work that we're doing. And you mentioned, your mind being the limiter. I think that one experience that really stood out to me is that we ran. So a couple of years ago, I taught my mom how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And my aunt, and they're in their 60s. My mom's just about to turn 70 this year. And we would have them bring friends. So it was my mom and my aunt, and then they would bring friends. And I was not the dungeon master. It was Allie, who I think, Rodney, I don't know if you've met Allie. I think you did. Mm-hmm. No, you did. Yeah. You ran a game for Allie. So Allie was the dungeon master, and we ran several episodes of this game that she created. And every time we had a guest come in, we would interview them and say, like, what are you looking forward to? What do you think? Do you know about Dungeons and Dragons? Because these were all their friends. My mom calls them the baby boomer babes. And so they would come in, and every single time, the person that was the guest would say, I don't know if I'm creative enough to do this. I don't know if I'm going to do this right. And to see them then actually go through the experience of playing the game itself and what that opened up for them, and the creativity, as you said, Keith, was just astronomical. And every single one was like, when can I play again? I want to do this again. So, it really is a common ground thing, that our minds do limit us. Our self-confidence limits us. in what we can do. And the good news is that games are for everyone and fun is for everyone. And there's always a way to help others to find that connection within themselves, within their communities.
Mm. And I mean, that's a really good tie into what he just said. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I think we may possibly have to do it again because there's more that we could talk about. But our time has gone so fast. We've had fun here in this space together. So thank you for giving us a little bit of your day and the listeners.
Thank you guys so much. I had such a great time chatting with you, and I can't wait to come back and chat more.
Awesome. Well, I will give you our last question, which is, what does compassion mean to you?
Compassion. Oh, compassion is meeting people where they are, and understanding that they all have their own unique histories and journeys and backgrounds that are important. So being compassionate is really trying to have that heart connection enough that you care about that person's background and what they've been through and what they've gone through, and finding a way to connect.